You must be exhausted after that. Thank you. Thank you for the really kind and long introduction. I didn't realize I had that much on my bio. Yeah, so I've been to 2 Super Bowls in my life. The first one was with the Eagles against the Patriots, which I honestly thought that they were not going to win. Of course, nobody did. And I surprised my husband with that. So I got actually Wife of the Century Award. And then we went to Phoenix, which was a great game, but not the outcome we wanted. But I did wear my first Eagles jersey in public. And my sisters were not happy on Facebook. All right. Hey, so thanks for taking the time. I know I'm between me and lunch, so I'll try and make this as entertaining as I can and informative. But I want to talk about like the future of work, because it's changed. If you had told me like 5 or 6 years ago, we'd be talking about empathy in the workplace, mental wellness and mental health as a key topic, I'd have said, I don't think we're ready for that in corporate America. But the pandemic really fast forwarded that kind of progressive thinking about how do you lead during times of change and uncertainty. And then more critically is how do you also lead during a time where not everybody is in the office with you. And I remember working with CEOs in my past who would say, well, if they're not in the office, they're watching Netflix, which still may be the case because everyone's streaming these days. But people are probably more productive working through Zoom and through home, but they're also more burnt out. So what do we think about doing as we move forward into this new way of working? Because I don't think we're going to go back. I don't think we're going to see the butts in seats like we've seen in the past. So if any of you happen to manage real estate or it's part of your responsibility, we've got a road to hoe in terms of lots of subleases, lots of real estate open right now based off of lack of assets utilization in those spaces. But before I begin, who started a new job during the pandemic? Okay. And so I did the same. And unusual for me is I'm used to walking into an office space and you get a feel, you get a vibe. You kind of know, like, are people walking around? Are they talking? Are they drinking coffee? Is there a buzz? And I didn't have that, and I'm certain many of you didn't either, right? So you had to really assess the conversations with who you're meeting with. And then did you all get onboarded during this time as well? So the onboarding was really weird. Normally you come into the office, you spend time with people, you do meet and greets in person, and it all happened over Zoom. And then, for those of you who may have younger children, I've got a junior in college. Her first year in college was on Zoom, and her last half of her high school was on Zoom. So I only can imagine that generation, which is very much wanting to engage and feel like they have a connection, working through a time where they had a very different experience in school, and what's that going to mean for them going forward. So with that, I'll cover a few spots for you. So first of all, this is around evolving work habits. So back in like the 2000s, that was a time where we had lots of like offices and like cube farms, and it was very separate. Like you did your work and you went home. And you might have a best friend at work. You might have someone that you worked with closely, but this notion of collaboration really wasn't big and a focus. Then the 2010s era, you had certain those collaborative workspaces where everyone's sort of like, I don't know if I want to work in an open space because it means I have to like listen to other people talk. But you got used to it. You wore noise deafening earphones, or you found that casual collisions was a great way to solve a problem. How many of you have ever gone to the office and there's been a problem that's been nagging at you? You see the person you need to talk to in the hallway, you solve in the hallway, and you go back to doing your job. That's gotten more difficult, obviously, with this hybrid work environment. And then COVID happened, and I think we all were really surprised about the huge effects, both personally and professionally, for COVID. But what COVID opened up for us was this need to, how do you get people to connect more differently? The notion of personal life and work life became very blended. If you told me seeing a cat walk across the keyboard would stop a meeting and everyone would awdle and coo, I'd say, no, that's not possible. But nowadays, when the UPS guy comes to drop off a package, there's no longer the embarrassment of the doorbell ringing. It's a normal course of life, right? So the point in time where it was separate between personal and business is now very, very closely tied. So how do we think about what does that mean in terms of how we engage with our employees differently, both by attracting, developing, and retaining? And then we go back into the macro shifts, which have been lots of fun right now. So lots of competitiveness in the market. Even though there are layoffs going on in tech, Amazon, Google, Facebook, the list goes on and on, it's still a competitive work environment. And I think a lot of the companies who suffered during the pandemic and the tech took off, it's sort of switching now. And you're finding the technology is sort of behind the financial curve. So, but there's still competitive natures. There's still people looking for the top engineers or the top marketers. So how do you keep that in mind? And there's also a labor shortage. A lot of roles are going unstaffed because people clearly don't want to go back to the work they used to go to. Secondly, it's around how do you think about diversity inclusion? When the George Floyd murder happened, that sparked a whole different revolution in the US. And by the way, it wasn't anything new. It just got brought to a whole different view that suddenly we saw something happen on TV we never expected. But that diversity inclusion is also a big key because we have to make certain that we're bringing diverse thoughts and perspectives into the office. The idea that heterogeneous people who grew up together, have the same experiences together, the same networks together may not lend itself to better innovation than a group of diverse folks. And working with diverse can be difficult because everyone's bringing different ideas together, but you do get better results, it's proven. The next thing's around purposeful work. So I remember when I was first looking at jobs and I went to work for Frito-Lay, which was fantastic. I was everybody's best friend at the parties because I would bring product for free. So Cheetos, Lays, or pork rinds, I cut the line at pork rinds. I'm not going to do that. But there was a time where it wasn't really about the purposeful work. It was about a paycheck. Like, I want to make sure I make good money so I can buy myself a house or have the things I want in my life. But now employees and younger employees are really about purpose. Like, who's on the board? Is it properly represented? What is your stance on ESG or things around sustainability and diversity? What do they stand for? What are their values? So those things are really important right now, too, to also propagate with your potential employees. The next things around well-being, as I mentioned previously. So we have all amped up our investments in employee benefits. There used to be a time where you'd have a problem, you'd call this static EAP line. They'd say, well, you have 3 meetings for free with the therapist of your choice, and then you were done. And those things are out the door. Now there's everything from telehealth. There's, we actually have an employee resource group called Thrive, which is focusing on mental wellness. Our employees voted that as the second most important ERG they wanted to form because they want to talk about it in the workplace. So that's not going away. And I think it's really incumbent on us as employers to work with our employees related to those types of concerns and issues. And then, the whole sort of, looking at remote work and how do you engage employees through remote work? Because it's hard. I mean, the notion of being together in an office, you collaborate more effectively. Now we've hired people all remote. And the exciting part when the pandemic happened, if there's anything exciting on an upside, is it got a chance for you to hire people that weren't necessarily next to your real estate footprint, right? So you could hire people in different geographies, perhaps less expensive and more diverse. And now that we've hired all these people that are dispersed, how do you now engage with them differently? How do they get their development because they're separate from the main headquarters? So a lot of things, a lot of macroeconomics have gotten really complex for us as employers and for our employees. And then back to my point about changing demands of the workforce, right? So it goes from paycheck to my purpose, my satisfaction to my growth. I mean, all these expectations that were really about, I guess I call it like self-care, water, food, air, has now moved to things around my life, my strengths. I want to focus on my future, my holistic development. So there's been a real shift between what employees expected from their past and what they expect now. And again, that makes it even more demanding on probably one of the most underserved groups, which are managers, and I'll talk more about that. Then, not to totally get your head spinning, but the future of work by generation. We have 4 generations working together right now. You got baby boomers, you got this right, Gen X, you got millennials, and you got Gen Zs. And they all have differing needs. So on the left talks about what the similarities are. And they're things like, they like the notion of remote work. They feel like that's a place they can actually, work together very effectively. They enjoy the financial benefits. Who wouldn't? It's a place where they can work together and know how they work with each other. And they find a way that they can balance both work and life. The differences, however, is that the older workforce really does like to work, together, but they can work separately from a productivity perspective. The younger employees want connections. They're used to being able to, build engagement and connections with each other. And now we're working remotely, it makes it difficult. They're very tech savvy, and so the opportunity to leverage technology to help you with collaboration is super helpful, but it makes it challenging. And then the interesting thing is I think the older folks, me included, want a little work-life balance. And I call it work-life integration because work-life balance is, you'll never reach it. Some days I'm a better mom, I'm a better employee, and other days I'm a great employee and not such a good mom. So you have to be able to deal with your balancing of how you think about integrating your work and life, and with the flexibility that helps me. But the younger group is like, I want to work really hard. I don't care about burnout. I just want to do what I do every day and be engaged. So it's a real diversity of how you think about managing these multiple generations. And it's only going to get more challenging, I believe. And then here's a really cool study that McKinsey did. So they surveyed, how do people feel about flexibility and working in a remote environment? So flexibility is more important than safety and other salary and other benefits. So typically, how much do I get paid? Do I work for someone I really like? Am I doing interesting work? Have typically been the three most important things. Now it's like, do I have flexibility in my job? And what other benefits do you have that will help me, manage the diversity I have in my life? Whether that's people that have elder care or those that are sandwiched between young child care and elder care. So all those benefits in the past that we didn't really put forth because we were also focused on the work have now become much more expansive because we're focused on the individual. The flexibility to work from anywhere. So almost a third of the population doesn't feel like if they had that flexibility, they're going to be successful. So they want that flexibility. It's a really critical part in terms of their productivity. They want autonomy. They want to be able to come to the office when they feel like it. Now, may I ask, how many of you have policies related to hybrid work? Okay, so I'll shout out, is it a couple days a week? Have you mandated it? A couple days a week, okay. Yeah, we're finding the same thing versus like mandating. Now, some tech giants like Apple, who's always been 5 days a week, and Facebook and Google have mandated this, but is having a blowback. Because again, people want that flexibility. Plus, people moved out of the areas in some instances. So Idaho, if you own land there a couple years ago, you're doing really well right now because the real estate prices have gone way up because people started to disperse from more expensive areas to go live there. So that makes it even more challenging in terms of getting people back into the office. Which leads me to this notion of mandates feel like a violation of autonomy, which is most important intrinsic drivers of threat and reward in the brain. This is from McKinsey. So the idea that when you're suddenly told you can't do something, or you must come in the office, or you must do something that is antithetical to how you want to operate, you either want to leave, or you get disengaged, and you do your job, you don't do it to its fullest extent. So I'm very much an advocate of not mandating people returning into the office. I'm about giving them reasons to want to come in, collaboration days, an opportunity to do some learning, a chance to have the exec team feed you ice cream, whatever it is that gets you in the office. But the notion of getting in the office is not to sit in your cube and do Zoom calls with somebody who's remote. It's to work together when you're together in the office. And that's going to be a big challenge and opportunity for us as employers in the country. And then the last thing I'd say is up to 81% of the eligible workforce will be hybrid or remote in the future. So again, it's only going to get more compounded. So how do we think about that as managers and as leaders to help really encourage and engage our employees? So I'm going to give you some practical tips. I'll tell you it's still a big field of study that a lot of companies are trying to figure out because it's new, it's emerging, and there's a lot of complications to it related to technology, how you think about privacy in terms of security. So I'll go into a couple of them. But the first thing is around engaging your employees, and that's everything from how do you make certain that they have, the really key focus on what's most important to them. They feel like they've got a place that they can be, contribute and do their best. They've got allies for them or ERGs to support them. They feel like they are being asked and provided input. Sorry, I didn't realize I didn't build that into the organization. The next thing is on engagement and well-being. So this goes back to, do people care about me as an individual? Are there things for me that would help me be better if I had work from home every day related to backup child care or elder care? Or are there ways from which I can come to work and have a sounding board to deal with what I'm dealing with every day? I'm not suggesting managers should be therapists. They should not, nor should HR folks. That's not what we majored in. But simply asking how are you and really caring versus in the hallway would make a big difference. So how do we get more empathetic around understanding how employees are dealing with change? The next one is on diversity and belonging. So again, this is all about having people come in feeling that they have a voice. And I've worked in environments where there were people that were in the margins and outside of the margins. And they didn't really have a voice, they didn't feel like they could contribute. And they could be diverse or non-diverse, it doesn't matter. There needs to be an equitable solution by which you bring people in and they feel like they can provide their perspective. They can have a contrary points of view. I've worked in places where there's a bit of a fear culture. That wasn't good for anybody. You want to be in a place where you can express yourself, but also, fail fast, as I heard TJ talk about, iterate quickly, especially when in the work we do, whether it's software or hardware, software in particular, you have to move quick, iterate fast. That's really critical for our business. And the last thing is around performance and alignment. So how many of you all have a formal performance management process? Okay, so shout out, is it like once a year reviews? Like how about you? Mid-year, and so like twice check-ins, so to speak? Anybody have something different?
Once a year.
Once a year, okay. So that monolithic once a year thing's going away, right? First of all, who likes getting a review? Okay, and who likes to be managed? No one, thank you. Thank you, my Steeler fan. And so the idea of like having once a year discussion is gone out the door. One, if you're going to run an effective business that's fast moving, you have to have constant feedback, constant like pivoting towards what's a priority today that wasn't a priority yesterday. How do I make certain that if you're not in a place where you're getting what you need to be successful, let me help coach you through it versus putting you on a performance plan. Let me help you think about your global mobility and what you need to do to build your career. Those things need to be ongoing. And so there's lots of tools out there and processes that we've also introduced, which is in the flow of work. So after you finish a project, let's do a 360. How did it work for the team? How did it work for the individual? Do it when it's fresh versus the old recency effect of, it's the old notion of I want to do my very best like the last 2 weeks before the year so my boss will remember how good I was versus the other 52 weeks that you were 50 weeks you worked in the year. How do you not have those recency effects, but really understand what the person's doing, how they're successful, and helps you as a leader direct your people towards the biggest priorities. So you're going to see more of that performance discussion being a natural place by which you have a more regular conversation than once a year or twice a year. Now let's talk about managers. How many of you guys are managers or ladies in the room? Okay. Has your job gotten harder? Yes, okay, thank you. So if you look at this, I think it's like 25% of managers feel burnt out and they have twice the amount of turnover. So, I've always thought manager jobs are hard because I won't use the S word because I gave up swearing for Lent, but I'm talking about. The S comes down and the S comes up and the manager is stuck in the middle because they're getting directions from their leader on budgeting, on new strategic priorities, on having to pivot a project for another project. And then underneath of them, you've got employees who are like, what's my career? I want feedback. I want promoted. What's my career path? And it makes it really hard for managers. And they've always been, I think, largely overserved in all the companies I've worked with the exception of Frito-Lay had a very good management program. In tech, it was sort of like throw you into the water and let you sink or swim. But now we're putting a real focus on how do you help managers navigate during this really difficult time? Because now you have to deal not only with your usual job, now you have to deal with hybrid work environments, people bringing in more discussions around their personal life versus their professional life. So it's become much more complex. And so there's a big focus right now on helping managers be successful in a very different way. And it's not just the logistics of how to get your computer set up or how to work in Workday. It's helping the manager learn how to navigate and also helping them onboard their employees. Because the view is if you aren't onboarded properly within your first month of employment, you have a 2x opportunity for retention challenges, meaning you won't stick around for the company because your first couple months really outline how you feel about the company. So that's why the manager's jobs have gotten even more challenging. So what are some of the things we can do? So first of all, I mentioned the intentional connections, which is, there's some people who have done office time, like I have office hours on Zoom, so I'm going to be hanging out doing work. Join me if you want to have a conversation. There's things like I do, which is tons of skip levels with my direct reports, or roundtables with my employees. But how do you have those personal connections so when someone's celebrating an anniversary or someone has a great thing that's happened at work? We really double down on recognition at our company because people need to be recognized to feel like they belong and also know that they're doing a good job. So how do you make those more formal? Scheduling those times are really critical. Think differently about the work relationship. As I mentioned previously, knowing what's important in people's lives will help you be a better manager, not just the task they have at hand. I work with managers where they just want to go through the task list, which is fine, because I like to mark stuff off of my list, but do they know what's going on with me? Do they know some of the challenges I'm having? Are they supportive of me talking with them about what I need to do to be successful in my job? Performance based on outcomes, impact, and ownership. So I've worked in companies where it was so, I don't know if you all have experienced this, regulated by what templates you complete, how the operational reviews look, because they're all about the dog and pony show of how pretty your slides look. They're all about, did you work collaboratively with people, but did you get to an outcome? You have to do both. And so I believe in building an autonomy and empowerment, which is focusing on the outcomes. Did you get to the outcomes? Now, did you do it with respect and dignity and the values of the company 100%? But whether you use this template or that template is no longer the focus. It ought to be on outcomes, milestones, metrics to show whether you're successful. And employees want to be managed that way. Don't manage me how I got there, manage what I got to. Set common operating strategies. So I'm a big view on like operating cadences. So when I have meetings, like shut your laptop. I used to hate that when I was an employee with a manager saying that to me because I want to be productive. But you got to be present, especially in these days when we're very ADD with everything going on around us. 2, you may say, you know, operating principles are, we're going to have, at the beginning of every meeting, we're going to talk about something that happened this weekend or something that you reflect upon that happened in the last week that you're proud of talking about. So there's little personal connections. And then frequent communications, because the more you communicate, the more people feel like there's trust and that there's, you know, you're being transparent with me. The other thing I would say is with frequent communications and when you're telling people what you're focused on, the say-do ratio is really big. Does anybody know what a say-do ratio is? It's you say you're going to do something and you do it. And employees pay attention. So if you say you're doing something and you don't do it, they suddenly say, I don't know if I trust them, or they erode my trust. And you may come and say, I thought we would have it on this time frame, we're going to have it on this time frame, and that's fine. But set up those regular communications, because especially right now with the macroeconomics and the layoffs, we've got a lot of spooked employees wondering what's for me, what's going to happen to me next. The next thing is about building trust and inclusion, as I mentioned previously. And this is about, I tend to lead with, when I have a group of people around me and we're having a discussion or a debate, I look to who's not agreeing. Because it's really easy to say, oh, those 8 people totally think it's a fabulous idea, and the one person doesn't. And typically that, I call them edge dwellers, but they typically have a reason why they don't see it that nobody else is seeing. So that takes that bias out of the confirmation that you want, and more about how do you make certain that you're ensuring everybody has a voice and you're listening keenly about someone who may have a contrary perspective, because very often they're right. Get proficient at working asynchronously, which is, we use Google, which I didn't initially love, but I'm getting used to, but Google Office, so you can actually do work asynchronously on a presentation or on a pivot table to get information, so you don't have to be in the meeting to do the work. So how do you come together, discuss a project that you're going to go after, and then go back to your places, do the work, not together, but separately, and then come back together. It's in the flow of work. You've got to be great at that. If you have a meeting, like I think we used to, for everything you're solving for, you're in meetings 10 hours a day and you're not getting to your work. So really get proficient. We have things like Slack where I work. We have the Google Sheets that helps us do collaborative work together. Lots of different technologies you can leverage for that. And the last thing is, be aware of bias. And if you have a belief, you got bias, right? It could be a bias towards the color purple. It could be bias towards the Steelers versus the Eagles. But the notion of we all have it, so like be aware of it, because it comes into everything we do every day. And a challenge with remote workforce or hybrid is the person who comes into the office who's with you, you have a tendency to put your arm around and give them more of the cool projects, and they have a chance to actually grow and get promoted versus the one who's doing great work, but they're not in the office, they're remote, they're on the phone. And I don't know how many of you remember this, but the days where we were in the office and there'd be like a couple people on the phone, they couldn't get a word in edgewise, right? Now we've democratized with everybody being on Zoom. How do you continue to have that experience? And it may be everybody is on Zoom, whether they're in the room or not, but you've got to find a way to get that level playing ground where everybody has a chance to contribute. And then I thought it would be good just to give you a couple case studies of like what some companies are doing, and a lot of creative things. Some I think will work, some won't long term. But Airbnb, everybody knows Airbnb, they're living their values. You can work anywhere, whether it's on a beach in Spain, which I would sign up for, or in downtown Manhattan. But they believe that because their world is all about giving people experiences outside of the regular, they experience the same thing for their employees. Panasonic, they are experimenting with 4-day work weeks. And that's been a big focus in Europe right now, where it doesn't mean you slam 5 days of work into 4 days, which I kind of think in the back of my mind that may be happening, but it's really helping people be more planful about how they do their work and prioritize. And I'll use an example. When I had my first child, and I was a person who would work like long hours and maybe come home and have a piece of cheese and a glass of wine for dinner. But when you have kids, I don't really like that stuff, so I had to find other ways to be more present. So I found like I became a much better manager. So I got far more prioritized. I didn't stay in the office late to do things that, oh, I'll just get that done because I have time. So the same thing goes for the 4-day work week. They're finding people are much more focused and prioritized. That things don't matter, they don't do them. The things that do matter, they do. So this might be an interesting thing I think will be finding its way into the US. Patagonia, I mean, who wouldn't love to work for Patagonia? It'd be something I would love to work with, but they are all about sabbaticals. So if you're there 4 or 5 years, they'll give you time paid off. And the time paid off is also experiencing things that they want to experience in terms of going to Peru or going to Argentina or different places to go do what they do best, which is hiking or being in the outdoors. So they actually support employees in that. And there's a time where sabbaticals were frowned upon because people felt like, well, they'll go on sabbatical and then they won't come back. But they're making their way back in a structured way. And then the last one is a company that I'm not so familiar with, but they're all about like everyone's remote. And so they believe that everybody should work remote and they can do really well. What they've also done is everybody has access to everybody's calendars. And they can put what they want on the calendar, so there's transparency that if we're going to work remote, you're not going to block a bunch of time for something that maybe you should be working with other people on. So lots of different strategies. Again, I think there's more to come, but I think a lot of them will be tested and true, and others will probably have their moment and then probably not be a continuous focus. So let's talk about what we're doing at Cohesity. So we do have customized collaboration days. Just to kind of orient you, we have like 4 big sites. We have San Jose, which is super competitive. We have RTP. We have Cork, Ireland. And then we have 2 sites in India, in Pune and Bangalore. And we're just opening up an office in Costa Rica, or a location in Costa Rica. And so we do have some real estate footprints. But what we're trying to do is bring people that are within commutable distances. Some places that's like 2 miles, that could be an hour, or it could be 2 miles in 5 minutes. But have them come into the office for structured collaboration days. So you're not just sitting in the office doing Zoom calls. We also have Clubhouse Office, which is once a month. We have big lunches that we serve. We watched the most recent World Cup soccer games. I mean, just kitschy stuff like that. You could put on movies, whatever, but a chance for people to come and eat together. Because growing up Italian, that's how we built family, was eating together, right? Investments in employee resource groups. So who has ERGs in their organizations? Okay. So when I first joined, we had the Black Cohesity Network. And in the last 2 years, we've had the Women's Impact Network. We have Thrive, which is in mental health. We have one on LGBTQ+, and then we're just getting ready to launch veterans. These were voted for by the employees of what they wanted us to be focused on. So they're really worth the investment. And where they work great is where you're building a sense of community and connectivity, but wherever they can play a role in helping you accelerate your business. And I'll give you an example. When I was at Symantec, we had a division called Norton LifeLock. You see the commercials, right, about your own personal protection from security. And so I was the exec sponsor for the early in career employees who were like right out of school or a couple years out. So they were great to use not only as an ERG to get them to connect, but also we would pick their brains on how do we get young people to care about security? Because really the younger cohort wants access to their apps and to having ability to use their whatever they want to use anywhere they want to use it. So how do we get them interested in those types of offerings that we had? So try to use your ERGs not only to help build connections, but help you recruit on campus, help you mentor other people, help provide a voice to maybe the executive team who isn't getting it in some of the things you're having to deal with. We do refresh days, which is, we just had one this weekend. We had Friday and Monday off. So nobody's on their computer unless you're into sales. I know my sales guys here, you probably had to work, sorry. but we're trying to find ways to give people a time to refresh. Because we probably all get about 100 to 200 emails a day. It basically stops unless there's something that's super critical. And it's a great way for employees to feel like, okay, I've got a chance to refresh and regroup and come back. We also have radio silence Wednesdays, which is from 1 to 3 globally, or 1 to 5, where we don't have meetings. Now, I can't say that always happens, because sometimes you do have meetings. We try and find a way to give people time to do think time and do their work. A lot of, as I mentioned, emphasis on mental well-being. We do a program called Walk With Me, which is basically, we have triads of people walking together and doing meetings on the walk or having conversations about what's going on in their lives together. It's a great way to get fit, as well as a way to get out of the office and have your conversations. We're doing a lot on inclusivity related to neuro leadership, which is really how to use how we think about how our brains work to remove bias, to open up our minds to different ways of thinking. They often say children, when they're really young, are really good at divergent thinking. I don't know if everyone's ever done that exercise where you give a child like a paperclip, and you give them like 10 minutes to find 100 different ways to use that, and they'll come in with 200 different ways to use it. But as you get older, it gets less and less, because your divergent thinking is constrained by judgment, what you can and can't do. And in this instance, we're trying to use that notion of constraining with judgment and opening people's minds up to how they can operate differently in this type of world that we live in. And the last thing, as I mentioned, was always on conversation. So not wait until that mid-year, which as a manager you dread because you have to collect all the data on the person's performance, but making it in the flow of work. Like, you did great in that meeting. Here's what I've done differently with the numbers you put forth. I don't think they were very clear, or wow, you really influenced them through how you had this discussion, et cetera. So using that real-time feedback is super important, and it's easy. If you do it frequently, you don't have to write that monolithic review at the end of the year that everybody dreads. And then in terms of like lessons to consider, so there's lots of interesting tools out there that looks at keystrokes, looks at the amount of time that you're on your Mac or your PC to see, are you really working, okay? I'm not a big proponent of those for lots of reasons, but I think it does not ingrain trust, nor does it truly tell the story of how someone's doing their work. The privacy and security piece, so this is like work anywhere, anytime, but sometimes you're working on networks that aren't secure with company data. So what are the impacts behind that we haven't even begun to think about, which makes the work we do pretty interesting, right? Because we can help with that. And the last thing is that the distance bias, as I mentioned previously. If you're not in the office with me and I'm working with somebody who is, I might have more of a bias to develop them or grow them versus somebody who's not in the office. So find ways to make certain that they're being connected with and they have a say in what's going on. Okay, so I'm here to wrap up on this last part, which is basically how to think again about your talent strategy. So again, we moved from talent strategies that were very individualized to more collaborative, more personal versus professional coming together. Employees want flexibility and autonomy. So if you tell them they have to do something, they're like all of us, they're going to relent, or not relent, but they're going to push back and say, I want my freedom. That's really, really critical. Hybrid remote work is a challenge that we're all facing right now. So how do you continue to focus on the engagement aspects of it and making certain that you're purposeful? So you have to make certain that you're doing things on a regular basis that brings that engagement in, whether it's collaboration days, whether it's videos from your CEO, whether it's going out into the field. Maybe everyone can't come to my office, but I can go meet people in Phoenix. We have 45 people there, so I go down there regularly just to bring people together for part of the collection of collaboration. Leading in a hybrid environment takes intentional focus, again, as I mentioned. And then building manager capability. Again, I think it's one of the hardest jobs and the most underserved jobs. So how do we continue to help our managers navigate through this difficult time of change? And then again, pay attention to the lessons learned by others. So there's, like I mentioned, there's going to be a lot coming out what other companies are working on. So we need to pay attention to see what's been successful, what's not. We are still in a learning journey here. And as I mentioned, 81% of our jobs will be hybrid going forward, so it's not going away. It's only going to get more complex. And then in closure, control leads to compliance. Autonomy leads to engagement. I believe rules take away choices. So if you can find a way to give people the autonomy they need with having the right kind of management around it, so people know that they have a manager who's invested in them, who's also helping them prioritize and also helping them grow and assess their talent. You have to have that in addition to the autonomy. It can't be one without the other. It's like inspection and inspiration. You need to have both, right? One without the other won't yield results. So with that, I don't know if we have a few minutes for Q&A, but We have time, unless you all want to go rush to dinner, or lunch. Yeah.
I have two questions. One, your opinion on something. When you were talking about the mandates, right, in the beginning, and big tech especially, do you believe that a lot of those mandates were a way to do a layoff without doing a layoff?
Because you're mandating people to come in. So he asked me, do you think mandates were a way to kind of exit people out? So there's a story back with Yahoo and Marissa, what's Marissa's last name? She was the CEO of Yahoo, came from Google. Myers, thank you. And Yahoo was like super distributed, almost to like a fault of dysfunction, right? So she said, and they were like living like 10 minutes from the office and an hour from the office, not as dispersed as we are. And she said, you all got to come in. And those that didn't come in led themselves to being restructured. I don't think that's the case here. I genuinely think executives want their people in the office. I mean, the one thing is I have like eight floors, of which a third are being used. I also oversee real estate. It's a small footprint compared to my time at Symantec, but that feels terrible to see all these empty desks. Plus, if you come into work and you don't see people next to you, it's like, well, why should I come in? So I think part of it's asset utilization. Two, there's a belief that there's better innovation through technology. And in terms of layoffs, I think you have an opportunity to be laid off whether you're in the office or outside the office. So I don't think those two go together.
And then the second was when we left and went home for the pandemic, we had a culture, right? And it was very different when we came back. Part of it had to do with a lot of new hires. Part of it had to do with the way we had to structure the office to come back. And I think as we did that, it caused issues with bringing people back because the culture was different, and it was trying to get that balance of culture that's been difficult. Is there anything that, any advice that you have on trying to get back to that?
Well, I think, so to me, I mean, culture, and I know you know this, aren't like those like 5 tenets you see on an office wall when you walk in. How many have seen those? Yeah. It's a feeling you get and a belief system. So part of me says you have to keep pounding or beating the drums on what our culture is about, what we stand for, and then you have to make decisions that support that. And that starts at the top in terms of being consistent and authentic to the culture you're trying to build. So if you're high growth, what are some of the things you need to do in order to be high growth from a cultural perspective, right? And then in terms of like hybrid versus non-hybrid in the office, I just think it requires us to find different ways to engage with them. Maybe they come in for boot camps. Maybe you go to them for boot camps to get inculcated not only in the product that you're selling, but also the culture you're trying to create. Because there's a time where they said, we'll bring everybody back in the office and we'll do a big meeting. I'm like, we can't afford that right now. It's not what people want to go do. So can we go out to them to do that type of intervention? So I think there's lots of different levers. I wish there was one silver bullet. There's not, but I think most importantly, stay true to the culture you're trying to build. Hybrid should not change the culture. It just makes it harder to maintain. It makes you have to be more purposeful. So thanks for the questions. Any other questions or comments or things any best practices any of you have come up?
Amy, to piggyback on what Chris asked.
Yeah.
Your company does collaboration days. Anything specifically of what your company does within those collaboration days?
Yeah, absolutely. So engineering will come in and we have what we call Scrum, so to speak. So they'll work on some of our innovation related to how we're moving the product along. In HR, in my world, we do whiteboarding sessions on maybe we're going to roll out a new process or program. Let's all do it together in a room. Whiteboarding is so much easier in person. I hate to say that's such old technology, but that pen and a whiteboard is really powerful. Marketing, they come together and they plan events together for channel partners or field marketing. So they come together to do a particular project or tool. It's not collaboration for collaboration's sake. And then along the way, you might have some happy hour along the way to kind of get people more, together from a personal perspective. It's a great question.
I mean, one thing we have observed, as a result, we are almost fully remote now. And the organization, the way people work together, the perception is becoming a lot more hierarchical. We used to have a very flat organization. Everybody knew everyone else. You know how to work together. You almost can tell the roles, who's a manager, who's working on a team when you walk on a team. Now it's a little different, and the perception is that part of that is because people who used to work together before the pandemic know how to interact. It's very simple. Everyone who's new and grew up in this remote environment, a lot more difficult. We have smaller groups, maybe one-to-one connections, but that makes the pyramid a lot more of a pyramid rather than a flat organization. We're trying to address that challenge, and honestly, I don't know if we have found a solution.
How have you been? So his point is with the everyone knew each other. Now they don't know each other as well, and there's become a hierarchy. How much do you focus on onboarding, where people get a chance to meet some of that hierarchy that really isn't hierarchical, but because they don't know them, they just assume that? Have you done anything to kind of help build that relationship?
We have tried. We set up a formal onboarding process when we start a new project, a new engagement, when someone is new. We have seen some benefits. I think a hybrid solution, what you were describing, that's what we are trying. So to bring people together at least once a month in one of the offices for a couple of days, so that you start rebuilding those
Relationships.
yes,
Yeah.
relationships and connections. We're working through it.
And I'd say the other thing to do, which I've been pushing my team, is it's always the same suspects on the projects. Like like some person can be on 8 different projects, and it's maybe it's because they're nearby, or we know how good they are because we've used them before. How do you start to member your team with different folks from the organization that will, one, help them build their skill set, 2, get a different perspective in place and make them feel like they belong? Because otherwise, they're just doing their own thing without understanding the broader strategy of the company. Which is the last thing I'd say to that point, too, is as your strategy evolves, which it will as we're running businesses, your line of sight for your employees is really important. So what do I do, and how does it contribute to that strategy of high growth or innovation or customer obsession? And if you can dial that down for employees to understand what I do and how it contributes, you're also going to create that sense of connection, because they're not just another cog in the wheel. They know that what they do has real impact to the margins of the company or the OpEx or the customer relationship. So that's a really important key in any company, whether it's hybrid or not, is that connection. Thank you for the question. All right. Well, I think I'm between you and lunch. So is any closing remarks? Or? Okay. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it.